All right. So, welcome everyone to the Cormac Chat. Today we'll be discussing The Road by Cormac McCarthy, a 2006 book that won the Pulitzer Prize in fiction. And what's it about, Cambrie?
The book talks about a father.
Louder.
Oh my goodness. The book talks about a father and a son crossing a burned America in a post-apocalyptic world.
Pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it.
Pretty depressing.
Pretty awful.
Really cynical.
All right. So, I think we all can agree that a major theme of the book was, trying to hold on to hope, and how it's phrased in the book is carrying the fire. So like, how do you guys think that it relates to like an overall theme of mortality and like the goodness in the world?
Okay. So I feel like the father views the son as any good that's left in the world. And he's trying to kind of keep that alive. But you also said that you thought the fire was like hope, right?
Yeah, that was George. I also thought, it's also about carrying the fire for the next generation of people, and if society were to rebuild itself and the world was to be recreated, there'd have to be a foundation of morality and goodness in order to create a healthy society.
And I think all of them kind of come together to form like the perfect like allegory of what it is. But I think for me, it's really the hope of trying to find the good left in the world beyond just what he sees in his son, and then trying to maintain and grow that so then a new society can form with the fire that they've carried. You know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of a combination of like everything into where it's just this almost a beacon of all the good left.
Okay. Throughout the entire book, the son is asking his father about his own personal actions and the actions of others and why that is the case and why it's wrong or right. And my question was, do you think that this questioning is kind of a coming of age thing? Like it's new in their life and the father doesn't really know quite how to answer it? Or do you think it's more of a reoccurring thing?
So what I think, have either of you like ever had to babysit or like deal with
We
like
both
small kids?
have like
Little
multiple
sisters,
younger
yeah.
Oh, okay.
siblings.
There you go. See, I don't, but I've been a babysitter before. But I think it just goes hand in hand with being a young child that you're going to be questioning everything you see because almost everything's a new experience for you. But where I think the shift is, I think at one shift, a child matures enough to the point of they won't settle for the simple answers. They really want a thought out, like well constructed answer about why something the way it is, not just how something is. And so like I think you can kind of see that in the book, like kind of in the second half, he won't just accept that like they're the good guys anymore. He's questioning what makes them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he's like, are we really? And kind of analyzing why they could not be because of the things that they've done.
Yeah, his questioning has definitely surpassed the curiosity of childhood, and reached this point of like wanting real, in-depth answers.
Do you think he's reached that point because of the situation they're in? Like, do you think it's matured him more than he normally would be, like in our society?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about like the father sheltering his son and wanting to keep his son good and pure. But it's almost like in this world, he has to grow up quicker, especially with his father being sick and, dying soon. And they know that. He's trying to prepare his son, I think. And so he can't shelter him 100%, but he wants to. So he's kind of having that struggle.
Yeah. And definitely about the early maturity thing too. Like we agreed he's like 8 to 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
A child in our society who's 8 to 10 years old probably wouldn't be questioning their moral compass, like in their place in the world. Like it just seems more of a adult type of question.
And see, I think there's kind of
If you're a
like
good person.
real world proof that the maturity level can be affected by the situation. I mean, if you look at a country like the US where like it's pretty high socioeconomic, everyone is a decent living, people mature slower. I mean, like 10-year-olds still doing like, Fortnite dances in the streets.
Exactly. There's not as much responsibility for.
But if you look in like a country like, for example, like India, like they have much lower like socioeconomic standing, and so like kids will be, or even like a couple hundred years ago, kids were mature and out of the house and working by the time they were 8 or 10.
That's another thing we haven't talked about. Like, McCarthy describes the landscape all the time as like barren, it's almost like everything trivial about life has been taken away from it, and that's all the boy really has to think about and to
Mhm.
like
Exactly. There's no
debate
school
is
or
his
friends
life.
or anything for him to.
Yeah.
It's like the only thing he has left is the questioning of like the moral compass. You know,
Yeah. I think so.
I think that's a really good point because we've never actually talked about that
No,
before.
yeah.
No.
Yeah, because it's like every meaningless thing or essentially meaningless thing is out of the world, and only the hard hitting questions are left.
And it's like they're just walking on this road.
Exactly.
What else is he gonna?
There's no distraction.
So he does mature quicker than.
I really like that. And I think that all of this really goes to a common theme by McCarthy in the entire thing, that the situation someone in, of course, affects them, but
Yeah.
the severity of how it affects them is like really up to the question. Like this is kind of this book I feel like was kind of an extreme version, you know, of like this is a huge disaster that we don't know what it was, but we know almost everything's dead. So like, and it's seeing how the characters would react. And as we talked about a little earlier, it doesn't matter the scale of it. People are going to react to situations.
Mm-hmm. It kind of provides different reactions with like the mother killing herself, and the cannibals and the thieves and the old man who's just walking, like just waiting to die. I don't know. I feel like it kind of explores the different ways that people might react to it in regards to morality.
Yeah. See, I think there's that constant question of how would like you or I react in a situation like this. You
Yeah,
know?
because you read
Yes.
the book and you're like, oh, I would never.
I would
eat
never
a
do anything
person.
like that. But
Yeah,
then
but
you never know.
I think it's kind of a scary thought.
It's
Mhm.
terrifying.
It really makes you self-evaluate, but I think it's like kind of an important thing to look at because it like always reflects back to what you value. You know?
And we can like roll that into talking about like the difference in between good and bad in the book. Because as we said, something Victoria might think is bad, I'd be totally fine with, or
Vice
might
versa,
think it's good. Yeah. And in the book, the boy's only distinction in between good and bad guys, it's very distinct. It's like night and day for him.
Exactly.
And it's if they eat people or not. But in real life, you know, it's much more gray than that.
Yeah, there's
And a lot of
so much
things-
more ambiguity.
A lot of things that they do could be seen as bad, but that's where he draws the line.
Yeah, exactly. And as people sink deeper into desperation, you see how their lines shift and change with
And they
the
would have to.
experience.
You know? Like,
Exactly.
Yeah, and then a big event, like in this case, the whatever disaster caused the extinction of everyone, that can just like completely shift the line way farther than you ever thought you'd be able to go.
what do we think about the father and the son keeping their line where they had it? Do you agree with him, or like, do you feel like at times more should have been done?
I feel like they, on the whole, they kept their line pretty well. They always tried to avoid violence. They would never take from someone that they knew was there.
Yeah.
They would only try to scavenge what was someone had lost. But I do think there were times, like, if you guys remember when the man stole their stuff thinking it was abandoned,
Yes.
you know, and then the father's reaction was, I think we all agreed, very, very dark and
Very
almost
severe.
crossing a line.
Exactly.
And
I think
the boy
as
kept
he-
him.
Yeah, the boy definitely kept him. Like, tried to keep pulling back, yeah. But I think that goes to that has to do with the fact that the father knew that he was dying, and he knew he was going to have to leave his son because, as you said, he knew he would never kill him. So if all of their stuff got stolen, I think that in like the people with the flare gun and everything, that whole situation, that as he was nearing the end, he was desperate to make sure his son was safe because he could never kill him.
Yeah. Do you think that it was intentionally portrayed that it was kind of a balance between the father and the son? Like, I feel like the son was the only thing keeping the father from tipping the scales to, like, crossing that line.
Exactly, yes, they definitely juxtapose each other well. Because the father's more, like, vast experience and the son's, like, young, more innocent persona definitely help keep each other. And the father, I think it goes both ways because some of the things the father does, the son probably wouldn't. He questions them taking the food. He questions the bunker, like, if this belongs to someone. So I think without the father, the son might have been too timid or too like good.
Yeah, it's not just
On
like
his own?
good or bad, because some of the things the father did, he had to do.
They had to
and
do,
the son
and the
wouldn't
son
have done
never
them.
would have. So
Like when they killed the man.
it's definitely a balance of survival, and I think they definitely juxtapose each other well.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about like the ambiguity of like their names
Oh,
yes.
yes.
compared to like the
Uh-huh.
landscape? So McCarthy never names the two characters. They are the boy and the man,
Mhm.
the father and the son. But the landscape is described in like insane detail and imagery. So like, why do we think?
See, for me, like I was like he always used like terms like about like architecture or like geology I'd never heard before,
I had
then
to look
like
all of them up.
Me too.
but see, for me, what it really came down to, it almost like read like kind of a travel guide,
Mhm.
you know, or almost like kind of like a journal where it's like the father documenting the experiences, and I mean it was probably pretty clear that the father wasn't because the story went on past him, but the way it was read, all the human aspects were very concise, very to the point, abrupt. Like most conversations between the father and the son, each exchange will only be a couple words. Like it'd be like, "Are you sure? No," or "I don't know." Like just
Yeah.
very short phrases. But then you just have paragraphs and paragraphs using different ways to describe the landscape over and over, even though it's the same landscape,
Yeah.
finding different ways to personify it and describe it.
Exactly. The characterization of the landscape, I think, really goes back to the fact that what the point McCarthy wanted to make was that it's more the landscape affecting the people, and that the landscape in the environment is the biggest player here, and not the two characters, because
Mhm.
the characters themselves are almost irrelevant. Like they're not
But it is about how like the characters are affected.
by the landscape. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like the environment's more of a continuous common factor that
I definitely agree with that. And I think it like kind of shows that, or you can kind of view it as even all the people that they meet and all the problems they have with the people, like with the cannibal house, with the man that shoots him with the arrow, all that stuff, they're a product of their environment, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not fair to assume that the cannibals would be eating people normally if the world was fine. And it's not justifying it, but it's saying that they're doing it because of the situation. And so I think that really goes back to showing, like, as you said, Victoria, the landscape is like the dominant force, you know?
yeah, it's the dominant force in this world. And okay. So what do you guys think about the ashes?
About like the hopelessness.
Yeah.
And it kind of covers everything.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
shrouds everything and everyone, which I thought was cool.
What I was thinking, if you remember, all throughout the book, it always just kind of occasionally mentioned that they would like make a new mask,
Yeah.
and that was
Mhm.
to prevent against the ashes. Because, like, as you said, the ashes like consume literally everything. Like you can't even see,
Yeah,
you
they
can't
can't go
walk, you can't
inside.
breathe.
It's everywhere.
And it's almost like when they wear the mask, it's like the one protect part and like the one almost like pure part left, and it's almost like I think there's almost a symbolism with that being them in the world, where they're like the only like unmarred
Yeah.
one of the few unmarred like surfaces of the earth.
Exactly, trying to
Also-
prevent the hopelessness and the horror and terror from consuming them as well.
I mean, if you think about it, the father does get shot with the arrow, but his ultimate death comes from his lungs and like the hopelessness.
Mhm.
You could even see it as
Around
that.
him, yeah.
As if,
Or the same thing with the boy getting like violently ill, but he recovered.
he recovers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From
We can't talk about that.
good.
We didn't. I liked it. Let's see. Let's look at some of these.
I think we've.
One thing is that I was kind of
Oh.
wondering with so I think throughout the book it seemed to get more and more hopeless. I mean, there's the occasional like kind of upward peak of like with the bunker, for instance, like things they became hopeful for a little bit. But what effect do you think like the constant disappointment, like over and over, would have on your psyche? And like, do you think the human spirit can endure like through too much of that?
I mean, I don't, because the father, he endures. The mother doesn't, right? She gives up, she kills herself. The father endures for the son.
Mhm.
The son doesn't have anything to keep him alive. So
No.
he begs to die all the time. He wants to die. And then if you think about, oh, well, there's other people alive other than the father, and they might have a different purpose, but they're cannibals and they're thieves, you know? So it's almost like their humanity didn't endure.
Mhm.
They're just surviving.
And Victoria, I remember when we were discussing, you pointed out that there were multiple times where the father said he wished he could die.
Yes.
And then, um,
Yes.
yes. But I think it goes
he-
back to what you were saying, Cambrie, where like the boy is the only thing keeping him going.
Yeah, no, he has the boy, and the boy has nothing. So it's just a matter of time before.
So I do have to ask, do you think the father sometimes resents the boy? That the
Yeah, there's a passage in the book where he says, "Oh, if only my heart were made of stone." And he's like looking at the son sleeping, I think,
oh
and
yeah.
thinking about how much easier his life would be if he didn't have to keep him
If
alive.
he didn't care.
Yeah.
No, definitely.
Do you think he would have the same fate would have like taken him that took his wife, or do you think like
I definitely do. I think if he didn't have the son, if he didn't have that someone to look out for, some reason to live, he would have killed himself just like the mother.
I mean, he would have, like, he talked about it.
He definitely
If they
would.
were surrounded or something happened, he would kill his son with the gun. Or no, he'd kill his son with a rock, right?
yeah, and then shoot
And
himself.
then shoot himself with the gun. So
And
the
I-
son really was his only reason.
And I think kind of as a like whole too, like how to like, I think that's accurate in society too. Like you'll have things about people that are like suicidal or like I think we watched on a TED Talk last year in Miss Acox about how like a potential school shooter was like changed his mind because one person like befriended him, you know. And I think like
exactly.
I think it's like a good recognition that like one bright force can pull you through a lot, you know.
Carrying
Yeah,
the
just
fire.
something to hold on to.
Yeah, carrying the fire.
Carrying the
Yes.
fire.
I think that's like really.
Having that light in your life.
I think it's a commentary by McCarthy that the human spirit can endure, but sometimes it needs a little help about whether or not it should endure.
Yeah, there's definitely a necessary support system.
Yeah, I think we're good.
I think that about does it. But before we go, what were just like your overall impressions of the book, and like would you recommend it?
So good. I had seen the
Fantastic.
movie before
Mhm.
with my dad. So like reading the book was just so good. Because I could definitely imagine it. I feel like if I wouldn't have seen the movie, I would have had a little bit of trouble with like, even though the landscape is described so in detail,
Yeah.
seeing it
Well, what's
definitely helps.
so interesting? It was described in such detail, but it was still so vague.
Yeah, because
Exactly.
he doesn't want you to know what caused it,
Mhm.
so he can't be like too precise.
Yeah, you can't be too specific.
So definitely seeing the movie first and then reading it made it that much better.
See, I really still need to go watch the movie, and
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you've never seen it. I would really recommend it. I really enjoyed it. It was
Yeah.
the most. It was a very engaging, and it really like kind of was. It really was different from most dystopian fiction.
Yeah.
So
Definitely,
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
All right. I think we're good. Let's do this.